let us get right to it. It's time for the rundown, the news and notes you need to know in no particular order to kick off today's show. And in doing so, did you know that America is just one big psyop? It really is. It really is. Now, I'm going to play you two clips. One is from Glenn Beck and Blaze Media, and he is speaking with a Twitter user, I keep saying Twitter, an X user, pardon me, called Data Republican. And Data Republican is actually deaf and mute, so when you see the interview, you're hearing the translator. But the Data Republican has just been collecting data on all kinds of government nefariousness and so on. And it'll be interesting. It's interesting to note how Data Republican highlights silencing and censorship as a big part of it. Then an interview that Joe Rogan had recently from the Joe Rogan Show that also talks about how for a psyop to occur, you need one of at least 20 different markers, but one will do it. And that one, you guessed it, is the silencing of dissenting or alternative opinions. Let's check these out.
Stop this? Because I know there's more levels to it than what, we're showing from your research now.
All the globalists, and I don't really like that term globalist, but anyway, well, it doesn't matter. But they all emphasize this censorship and this secrecy. And the reason why they're offended is because their power depends on people not knowing what they're doing with their money. And so that is truly censorship. Because I think if actual Americans understood what they were doing with our money and that they were actually setting up their own government and actually ignoring what real people wanted to do, we would be so upset. Because the reality is that these people have a government unto themselves that they've created with these NGOs that they run separately from us. And the reason I'm doing this interview is because I want to promote the knowledge to the public that these people operate in different vocabulary with different rules, and they have made their own government inside ours with our money.
And that people discuss, do you think that someone sat in a room and that people discussed the best ways to get people to comply?
Yes. Oh, yes. I would bet my career because it was executed following textbook protocol. And there are these, I made a YouTube video on my channel of like how to spot psyops, and there's like 20 different little things. You only need one thing, and you can spot whether or not you're standing in the middle of a psyop. And that one thing is, if the opinion that's coming out needs people to be silenced, it's a psyop. There are psychological operations in play.
Andrew, I'm chuckling because if you don't laugh, you'll cry. I mean, this has really been the last 3 years with Sherlock Exposes, where we've talked about this. God bless Data Republican. She's been through it, man. They doxed her and everything like that. And all she's trying to do is tell the truth, but she's proving the point about the psyop. Andrew, I think people have a hard time understanding, and Juliana and I go over this on our evening show, Close of Business, where we just kind of open the doors and let people inside of our head as to where we get all of our stuff from. We talk a lot about the fact that most people can't wrap their head around the fact that their governments would be anything but kind and noble and benevolent to them. They do not realize that much of this apparatus is their enemy. And I love how the dot was connected with the NGOs. You wonder how a politician can make $175,000 or so a year and end up coming out a multimillionaire. Well, they vote to move money through to NGOs for things that they can't get through Congress, and then that money magically flows back to them in some way, shape, or form, often to a nonprofit that they've created so that when they get out of office, they have a job that pays them really, really well. Or there's some other investment that's done, and next thing you know, a guy like Maxwell Frost, who represents in Congress here in Central Florida, didn't have good enough credit to get an apartment in DC in his first term, but is now worth like $1.5 million. This is how the bread is buttered, so to speak, or the sausage is made, as they say. These people aren't your friend. And the sooner that you understand that and you take the information that the Data Republican does or the gentleman who was on Rogan does, the better off you're going to be.
Speaking of operating in silence and in secrecy and showing you one thing. There is a second set of books for the U.S. government. Catherine Austin Fitts on FASB 56. She was recently on with Maria Z and Rumble show and talking about just that, America's second set of books.
The greatest corruption in the United States, or at the very heart of the corruption since fiscal 1998, is the U.S. refusing to obey its financial management laws. And it got so bad, Maria, that in the last Trump administration, Trump promulgated a policy called FASB 56, which said, okay, we can keep secret books. And so since the last Trump administration, the books of the United States have been secret. You know, clearly the uniparty, that's a uniparty policy. Biden didn't change it back. And Trump hasn't said a word, okay? Not a word about the secret books. So Trump is talking about radical transparency. If you have FASB 56 in place, you don't believe in any transparency. You are a total secret. Okay, now, before they instituted FASB 56, we know that 21 trillion was missing. Now, if you listen to the DOGE initiative, they're talking about cutting the annual expenditures $2 trillion.
Yes.
They're not talking about where is the 21 trillion and how do you get it back.
Right.
So they're not mentioning, you know, so if you want to return the United States to a fiscally sound basis, the first thing you do is you go over and you'd audit DOD, Treasury, the Treasury accounts and the DOD and HUD accounts at New York Fed and HUD. You know, you do those 4 or 5 audits and you'd figure out who got the 21 trillion and you get it back.
RC, what is this all about?
Yeah, so Catherine Austin Fitts has been on this for the better part of 20 years. You know, she was the assistant director of HUD in the 90s. And so she's been through the process of confirmation. She knows how the government works. She had uncovered so much and was in a meeting with high level people where they basically told her, Catherine, look, the United States is over. We're strip mining and pulling out as much of the assets as we can because America's over and things are going to change. And that number, interestingly enough, is now up to 21 trillion. So what Catherine Austin Fitts was pointing out is that FASB 56 basically allows the U.S. government to set up a second set of books. And she said, if it's interesting that this fired up under Biden, but Trump hasn't moved to crush it so that we can actually get a look inside. What she shared was, interestingly enough, if you got rid of FASB 56, you would see that there's 21 trillion on the other side of the ledger, and then we'd be balanced. There wouldn't be a debt. And you have to wonder why this isn't happening. Like, what's stopping it from moving when you have such a contrast between the Biden administration and the Trump administration? Why is no one in the Trump administration interested, especially with DOGE, in getting rid of something that would basically open the floodgates for what's gone wrong?
You know, it's another conversation because I want to read the new spending bill that passed, this budget bill that passed, but it connects to that, does it not? Because this budget resolution really it sets up what the future legislation is, right? And what we're going to spend on and so on. According to one report, it has spending limits in place for the deficit, but not close to actually close the gap. It allocates resources to national defense and border security to a degree. It's going to extend the Trump tax cuts effectively. But the healthcare reform, what it says, it'll include measures to control spending and efficient use of resources in Medicaid, getting rid of waste and not benefits. Those are some of the good things. But then Thomas Massey voted against it, and he's getting a lot of heat for that. But Thomas Massey notes that while it extends the 5-year tax holiday, because it doesn't actually cut spending, it increases the deficit by over $300 billion a year. And over 10 years, the budget will add $20 trillion to the U.S. debt. Republicans are simply not on board with any real substantial spending cuts, are they? And so they need a second set of books.
So, Andrew, let's go back to the first set of stories. What did Data Republican do? She uncovered that these people have set up a separate government in and of themselves. You're not going to stop the gravy train coming if you're benefiting from it. This is the exact reason why Congress won't regulate themselves when it comes to investments. It's a quote unquote gray area. And this is why it's great that things in parallel economies are popping up, whether it's CJ Constantinos, who was on with us to talk about what he's doing on the Bitcoin side, or whether it's with Goldback. States need to step in here at some point. And I don't want to go off on a tangent, Andrew, but if we don't do something, if the federal government doesn't get a smack, then they're going to continue to operate this way. Here's the crazy part, Andrew. Most people forget, because we've lost Schoolhouse Rock, right? Is that the federal government is a creation of the states. The states actually have a high level of control over what these fools do. And you lose some of that, though, throughout history with the repealing with the 17th Amendment, right? Which allowed popular voting for senators versus the states being able to appoint them, which takes the states largely out of that process. But there's still power there. And until someone steps up and says, no, that's not going to work. Thomas Massey is actually showing us the way. Just say no. He knew that his one vote wasn't going to make all the difference, but he needed to make a statement to help people understand, because they're going to say, well, Congressman Massey, why did you vote against that? Well, glad you asked. Thanks for asking. Let me explain everything that's wrong. How are we going to add 20 trillion more after we got 21 trillion that we apparently can't find because there's a second set of books? Andrew, this only ends one way. You and I both know what it is, and it ain't good.